we polled the audience and said, how many of you speak to your injured worker, or do you rely on your TPA or carrier to do so? And well over 60% said they relied on the TPA or carrier to talk to the injured worker. And I challenged that audience and I said, I challenge you today to pick up the phone and call your injured worker and ask them how they are. And I don't think there's any attorney in the United States that's going to come down on you for calling and asking, how are you? Are you okay? How's your family? How's your recovery going?
Welcome to It's Settled, the Ametros podcast. Each episode, we're going to dig into the humanity in workers' compensation and insurance claims, exploring the stories of injured people and those who support them, as well as the good work professionals are doing in the industry. And now, I invite you to join me, Sean Dean, General Counsel at Ametros and the host of It's Settled. Now, it's settled. Let's get on to the episode. We are doing a podcast with Debra Livingston. We are very, very happy to have Debra with us, who's founder of ReEmployAbility and someone who I see as a titan in the workers' compensation industry. And I'm lucky enough to have been paired up with, and she was gracious enough to be on the podcast. So welcome, Debra. Appreciate
Thank you, Sean. Yeah, thanks for having me. Titan. I love that term.
So I always start off when I talk with folks who are in the work comp industry, and our goal is to have people who work to make a difference for injured individuals, and you're clearly doing that. But I always find people's journeys really fascinating, and typically workers' compensation seems to find us. We don't find it, and I'm hoping to flip that script for the next generation of work comp professionals. But I guess just give folks who may not know your background how you got involved with workers' compensation.
Yeah, sure. I think similar to most people, workers' compensation did find me as well. I mean, actually, the whole insurance industry found me. I graduated from Florida State University with a major in fashion merchandising and marketing. And I worked in that field for a short period of time, and the nights and weekends and holidays, it was awful. So I really wanted a office job. It was just like my dream. I would just love 9 to 5 in an office. And I had a girlfriend who worked for Aetna Insurance at the time, and she said they were hiring for claims adjusters, and I did not know what a claims adjuster was, and there was no Google back then. So I had to just use my network of people and ask about what that role was. And so I learned a little bit about it, and sure enough, interviewed and got the job with Aetna. And I was in their claims training program for a period of time. And at that time, you didn't really know if you were going to get selected to go into liability or if you were going selected to go into workers' compensation. They just kind of put you out of training where there was a need, and you learned all lines. But I actually really liked the idea of workers' compensation. So I went to my claims manager at the time here in our Tampa office. It was the Tampa office of Aetna at the time. And I said to him, I'd really like to stay in work comp. And if at all possible, I'd like to stay in Tampa. And he thought I was sick. He actually put his hand on my forehead and thought he felt my temperature. He's like, are you okay? No one wants to be in work comp. And in those days, work comp just really wasn't where people's careers were, moving up the ladder. It was more on the liability side.
So what drew you to, because you're right. And I guess to back up even further, as we sit here in 2022, Aetna isn't synonymous with workers' compensation. I mean, they're a very large managed care organization, group health, Medicare Advantage, but we don't think of, folks in the industry don't think of Aetna. So this is going back a while.
Yeah. Back in the early or mid 90s, I'd say it was early to mid 90s. Yeah. 1990 actually was when I started with Aetna. So, and work comp was just becoming a big deal, or maybe it was becoming something they started paying attention to because of costs. I think costs drove that. And maybe costs, and maybe the insurance companies were starting to make money. But yeah, Aetna no longer exists in our market. They were assumed by the Travelers many years later. And so they're only on the group health side now. But then they were a big player in the market. And they had a very good reputation for their claims training program. So I was fortunate enough to get on board there and really, really learn the industry. And so I was able to stay here in the Tampa Bay area, and I became a work comp adjuster. And I think what attracted me to it, there were two reasons. One, I'm a little bit embarrassed to admit to, but I will. And the rest of it is probably a little bit more altruistic. I did care about people. And I knew that there was an injured worker at the end of the day that was being cared for. In that time in workers' compensation, the adjusters handled all aspects of the claim. So you were kind of like a business manager. You managed medical. You did a lot on that file. So it was a breadth of knowledge and information that you had to have. So I learned a lot from that. And then, to be honest, liability kind of scared me a little bit. There was a lot more of that policy review and room for error there. And then probably even maybe I was just a little bit intimidated by that because it was such a male dominated field too, the liability side. There were more women working on the work comp side. So there might've been a component of that kind of played into it. And now that I think back.
Okay. So hearkening back to those early days when you were handling your first claims and sort of cutting your teeth on it, what stands out to you in claims handling? So I was a field adjuster. So we actually used to visit people in their homes. And thinking about that now, like it's almost frightening to think about going to a stranger's house and sitting in their living room and having a glass of water or a cup of coffee with them and talking about what they've been through. So that was really intriguing, and having a territory and having to get into a car and drive. Like I had the Fort Myers, Naples territory. So I used to drive several hours to get there, and I would probably meet with 5 or 6 injured workers within a couple of days and get their whole stories. And so it was the best story I have, Sean, I have to share this. Okay.
Is I had an injured worker in Lewiston, Florida, which is kind of where the sugar canes are being grown. It's kind of towards the middle of the state. There's a lot of land there. And I pull up to this man's property, and he and his wife were sitting outside waiting for me. Very nice couple. And I park the car. And as I park the car, a monkey comes from nowhere and jumps on my windshield and just starts screeching in my face. And I'm just sitting there staring at this monkey's face, like right in my face. And the injured worker comes hobbling out, and he's like, it's okay. I'll get him and put him in his cage, and so he did. He got him, put him in his cage. And then I got out of the car and we proceeded. But that I will never forget as long as I live.
So it was a pet monkey that was just kind of roaming the property. Yeah, you don't forget that. That stays with you forever. No. Yeah, I'm wondering, and we're going to get into your entire background and where you sort of ended up and where you're making your mark. But do you think that, because this really doesn't happen, I mean, there are some folks who get to interface directly one-on-one with injured folks, but do you think that early on, being in the field and meeting people and seeing their faces and getting to know their stories and seeing their spouses and significant others and their living situation, do you think that it helped inform what you ended up eventually doing?
Yeah, I think so. It really, it was all about people, right? And the connection, the human connection with people. And I think I felt that very early on. Getting to know your injured worker that way, when you're spending, a good hour with them talking about not just their injury, but you get to learn who they are as a person. That's, I think, something that's really missing today. But it is what has drawn me to this whole return to work, I guess you'd say, philosophy and advocacy for the injured worker in the return to work arena.
So take us through your claims handling career. Like, how long did you do that?
Yeah, so I handled workers' compensation claims here in Tampa for, I want to say 3 years.
Okay.
And then at the 3-year mark, I really felt like I needed to get some liability experience because I wanted to move into national accounts, which is where the customers were being serviced, really. So I actually moved out to California for a period of time. It was a short period. It was about a year. And out there, I handled environmental and toxic tort claims. That was just riveting. And I'm being sarcastic.
Yeah.
So dry, so boring. Really talk about going from human interaction to no human interaction. It was a lot of research, a lot of that reviewing policies and things like that. I mean, I learned a lot from it, but I couldn't wait to get out of it. So thankfully, I had networked quite a bit within the organization, and then a national accounts position had come open in the Atlanta market, and I relocated about a year later back this way and worked out of the Atlanta National Accounts Office, which is really where I got to learn about insurance and really got to understand premiums and loss control and safety and return to work and what that meant to the client.
So that's I'm sure a unique skill set that you acquired from dealing with individuals, and then getting to see directly how the workers' compensation system worked vis-a-vis a human being, and then you got to go out west and kind of maybe get a little geeky with some of the policy stuff. I'm sure some of the legal stuff too.
Oh, yeah.
And then you moved into national accounts and you saw sort of how insurance worked on the back end. So you're getting a full, well-rounded insurance education on the job. So how long did you do that?
So I was with Aetna until I want to say about, let's see, I actually met my husband in California. So I always look like that was the reason why I ended up out there. And then we moved we moved to Atlanta. We got married in 97. And then I think it was right around when we got married was when I left Aetna. And so, then I went to work directly for an employer doing risk management, workers' compensation claims management for that employer. So yeah, I did that till about 97 for a couple of years. And then I got the employer's perspective. So I worked for a large employer for a little while.
So it's like full circle for you.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's, it seems in this day and age, it's kind of rare. It seems, for better or worse, that folks get into insurance, specifically work comp, and they kind of niche down. And they get really specialized, which isn't a bad thing. But I imagine it was helpful for you. Hindsight is what it is, but having that well-rounded sort of complete picture of everything and getting to actually do the job.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and even further along, like after I worked for the employer, I went to work for a managed care company for a little while. So I got to see that side. And then from there, I worked for a small insurance brokerage firm as their claims consultant. So I always like to say I've worked in pretty much every facet of the industry.
You have a 360.
Exactly. So before even starting my own business, I went through all of that and really have perspective on how the industry operates and runs because of that. And I understand the perspective from each party, and especially as it relates to my service and business.
And so I guess moving towards that, what was the initial impetus behind return to work? What was the spark for you? Was it a single event? Was it a conversation? Did you see an opportunity? Or was it all of the above?
It was a little bit of all of that. So I was at a conference, and this was in 1993 here in Florida, and the law was changing. And we were going from what you might remember in Florida was the Social Security disability, what we called the Social Security disability law.
Yeah.
Where pretty much if an injured worker got Social Security disability, they were permanently and totally disabled.
Yeah.
And then we shifted in 93, not 93, I'm sorry. Was it 90? No, it was 2003, maybe 2003. I'm kind of like getting my years jumbled up. I think it was 2003. Yeah. We shifted back to what I would call a return to work law, where now the injured worker or the employer had to demonstrate that they were unable to work before they could get permanent disability. So I was at a conference, and a great mentor of mine, Jim Greer, who I worked with at Aetna, was my claims manager at Aetna, was at that conference, and he came over to the table I was sitting at, and I said, gosh, somebody should start a return to work business. And he said, yeah, that really should be you. And I was like, yeah, no. He's like,
was
no,
this
really?
the same person who took your temperature to make sure?
No, it was a different person. That was the actual claims manager over the whole office. Jim was over the work comp section of that office. So I was like, really? And he was like, yeah, really, we need to sidebar. So we got together, had a few lunches, had a few glasses of wine, kind of talked through what that would look like. And he was really my inspiration and really gave me the courage to step out and just kind of try this on my own. And so when I started the company, it was, we were finding injured workers who had reached MMI jobs. So we were providing job placement services after they had already gone through the vocational assessment process. So we were purely looking for jobs for injured workers. Okay. And then that model, then we evolved into what is today now transition to work.
Gotcha. So what was it, and we could talk for 2 hours about it, but what was it like starting a business? Like when you think back to that?
So scary. First of all, my family thought I was nuts. Of course, I had 100% support from my husband, and thankfully he had a really solid, good paying job in IT. So we were kind of had to figure out how long could we make it before I could, before I don't need to get a paycheck don't need to get any money. Yeah. And so it was scary, finding that first employee to work for me. So it came down to I needed somebody to kind of run the office so that I could go out and market and sell because I had the connections. And so it was kind of testing the waters to see if there was one customer that would give us a shot. And we had that one customer. Actually, it was Bob O'Halloran over at Summit, who I am grateful for to this day for giving us that first file. I used to actually have that first check framed sitting on the wall. But yeah, so then we had a book person on staff, a kind of like an office manager on staff, and somebody who did job placement services, basically. And it was just this four people office.
And what year is this?
This would have been 2004.
Okay.
So we incorporated in 2003. I left my paying job and we actually opened the doors of the business in February of 2004 is when we actually started working it. So yeah, it was pretty scary. And there were times during those years where I was going to the post office just to see if there was money there so that I could pay the few people that I had, not even pay myself, but the few people that I had. And it just took off. The business took off and we were doing really well, and we were starting to expand into other states. And then the recession hit in 2008. And people that were able-bodied couldn't find jobs. And so let alone trying to find injured workers jobs were nearly impossible. But as, the stars aligned, I had a customer that came along. It was AIG. And they said, we have this client out of Houston, Texas, who's doing this program with nonprofit organizations, and they're looking for a partner to provide that service for them. And I said, absolutely, count me in, we'll do this. And I had heard of the concept, and I had looked into doing the concept myself when I was working at the employer, in my employer role. And so I was aware of what it was and how it worked. And we put it together for that one customer. And at the time I had one salesperson, Mary Bennett, who's now my VP of sales. And I said to her, Mary, go seed this with our clients and see what they think. And sure enough, little by little, more and more clients became interested and came on board. And it eclipsed the other service that we had to the point where I think about 5 years ago now, we completely eliminated the other service. And this is all we do now is transition to work.
Okay. To talk to me a little bit about sort of the nuts and bolts that goes along with, kind of from start to finish with an injured worker. Like what happens by the time you're providing your services to them?
Yeah, sure. So obviously they need a release to return to work in some capacity. If their employer is unable to accommodate that, then they would bring us in at that time. And we always say that the injured worker should be out of work for more than 2 to 4 weeks to benefit from our program, because by the time we secure an assignment for them and they're in the program, that makes the most economical sense and better for them. So anyway, so we'll get the referral from the client or the adjuster at that time, and then we go to work matching that injured worker with a nonprofit organization in our network. And we have a network of about 45,000 nonprofits throughout the United States, and constantly adding new ones because we try to add, within that injured workers community. We like it to be as close to their location of where they live or their commute to work as absolutely possible.
And as far as the fit, do you assign a caseworker? Is there someone looking at the specific role, or do you provide options to this worker? I assume they have to fill out some sort of questionnaire and survey, and you analyze their educational background and their skill set and their experience and stuff like that. But how involved are you in choosing the actual role that they end up taking?
Right. So we get a lot of information from the referral. And we take that information and we start by looking at what's the closest to them, because and what will match their restrictions. We do have clients that will specify the types of nonprofits that they would like their injured workers to work in, and we do occasionally ask the injured workers if they have a specific interest. But most of the time, in order to make it as seamless as possible, we look within our own network and match them with something that makes the most sense within their restrictions. So unless they have any objections to certain organizations, and sometimes people do,
Sure,
due to the nature of the work, then we will put them in one of our choosing, and one that we are have already onboarded and have worked with and who understand our program and our process. It's not to say that we don't consider what their interests are, but it makes most sense to do it that way.
And how are and forgive me for the ignorant questions, but
No, that's okay.
So obviously you have to get paid for this service. You're providing a really valuable service,
right,
to the former employer, the nonprofit, and the individual. Is everyone chipping in as far as your fees, or is it coming from the original employer?
Yeah, the employer carrier are paying our fees. So depending upon their program, is where the money comes from. But we generally invoice the carrier or the TPA, and they pay our fee. To the nonprofit organization, I mean, they don't have any financial stake in this. They're getting the volunteer, and that injured worker is the volunteer to that organization.
Okay.
And so their biggest role is really to oversee that injured worker, make sure they're working within their restrictions, and supervising the time that they're spending there and signing off on that.
And is there a wage that's being paid to this?
Yes. So, and then on the employer end, we require our employers to pay a wage to the injured worker while they're participating in the program. It doesn't have to be their full wage. Most of our clients do pay the full wage to offset the entire work comp benefit, but some of our clients will pay a minimum wage or up to the amount of the full benefit for the program.
Why do you think, return to work in the last 10 years is like, you hear the buzzword all the time.
Yeah.
And it sounds like, at least in Florida, there was a statutory change that sort of was the thrust, but I've read a lot of articles about it's more of a holistic approach to the individual who was injured. And there's something demoralizing about getting hurt and not being able to go to work. And there's something really empowering about getting back on your feet, or, so to speak, and being, feeling like you're being useful and you're contributing to something. So, I guess, I don't know if I have a specific question to it, but there is this unfair perception, I believe, in the workers' compensation industry by the public at large, in part because I think it's fueled just by pop culture and a little bit of cynicism, that injured people are trying to play the system, and I don't think that's fair. And obviously you'll have cases that are, where there's legal defenses to paying benefits, but by and large, maybe this is totally ignorant. I'd like to think that people really want to get back to work, and they don't want to just get a free lunch. So I guess maybe just talk a little bit about that concept to a degree, and maybe if you could sort of generalize the folks who are coming to you for those services, like what's going through their mind, what's it like for them to finally get placed?
Yeah, absolutely. I love talking about this. So first off, and there's a lot to unpack there with what
Sure.
you just said, right? So first off, I would say that return to work is not a new trend. Return to work has been and always will be the single most effective way to not just reduce the value of your claim, but to take care of your employee. And at the end of the day, what does your employee really want? They want to be taken care of and known that they are cared for by your organization. And there's really no better way to do that than return to work. So, you kind of tapped into that maybe 1% of fraud. And I would argue with anybody that you want to prevent fraud, have a return to work program. You want to prevent litigation, have a return to work program. I mean, it's the answer to all of the industry's problems, really. And it's just mind-boggling to me sometimes that we're still talking about it. We still have to talk about it. We still have to remind people that it's the best thing for them. And how many companies still don't do it or don't have a program in place. And it was interesting because I was reading something, I think it was on LinkedIn. It had really nothing to do with return to work, but it was really about managers kind of like selling why they do what they do kind of to the C-suite. And when the C-suite doesn't really know what they do day to day. And I thought that's kind of like workers' comp. I think a lot of people in work comp in their companies report to somebody who doesn't really understand it. And so trying to sell them on why return to work is so important is hard. But I think if it comes back to your culture as an organization and caring about your employees all the way holistically, it's really, that's what it comes down to, is that caring for that human being. And so I love to talk about this injured worker who I've spoken about quite a bit and who I actually got to speak with personally. His name is Walter. And he was a truck driver. He injured his shoulder, right shoulder, in lifting, doing something, obviously, as he was working. And his employer referred him to our program. And when he heard about our program, he wasn't really thrilled about it. He's like, I don't understand how, volunteering, going to this nonprofit organization is going to help me out. And he was very skeptical about it. He said the questions he asked were, how will I take care of my family? How is this going to help me recover? All of those same questions that, imagine if you were injured in any type of an accident, how you would feel about not being able to do what you do every single day. And he had all those questions. And then add to that, dealing with a system that is so incredibly confusing that the average person really can't understand it. And I always talk about how we understand it. Sure. We work it and live it and breathe it and have for however many years. To an injured worker, they have no clue. And you start talking to them about TTD, TPD, PTD, MMI. They don't understand the acronyms. They don't know who the players are. They are just going to listen to the John Morgan commercials on TV and go, wow, I don't understand this. And maybe this guy can explain it to me, right? So anyway, that's how this guy felt. And so we explained to him what the benefits of the program would be and how it would help him. And he was like, I'm still not getting it, but I'm going to participate and I'm going to see how it goes. So we put him in a thrift shop. And when he got there, and this is, his words were great. He was like, there were boxes and clothes and it was kind of musty. And he's like, I'm looking around thinking, why am I here? But he said, then I started meeting people and getting to know people and helping out and even seeing people in my own community coming to this place for their services. And he said, it changed my whole perspective.
Wow.
He said, and I felt like I was doing something meaningful. I was getting out of the house. My employer was paying me a wage. And he said, it really changed me. And he said, I've never volunteered before. And he said, so I was kind of being voluntold to do this,
Yeah.
but I will not forget the experience, and I will come back here and volunteer my time in the future. So so kind of to your point, that mental well-being, that mental health, and I think that all of us can really relate to this, having gone through this pandemic, right? We went
100%.
we went from our day-to-day routine to not being able to go to work overnight. And that's how an injured worker feels. And we all of us felt lost during that period of time. We didn't really know what the next move was going to be. You know, we didn't know if we were going to have jobs to go back to. We didn't know.
So much uncertainty.
Right? So much uncertainty. That's exactly how injured workers feel.
Yeah.
So I think if anything we've learned from the pandemic is a little glimpse into how that worker feels after an injury.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think that the pandemic was probably the most singular event in our lifetime that allowed us to, especially in the claims world, especially in the workers' compensation arena, to harness those experiences to have empathy for injured folks. I mean, we were worried about our jobs. We were worried about the economy. We were worried about our healthcare. Some of us were getting sick. Folks were going through. I mean, you were talking about some of the funky work comp acronyms. I mean, we all had no idea what some of these things were that folks were saying. Like, in this town, you wear a mask. In this town, you don't. You need to have. You need to sign up to get a vaccine. Like, just it was so confusing for a while. You didn't know what to believe, and you had other people telling you this. And there are definitely parallels that can be drawn between our collective experience going through the pandemic and what an injured worker goes through. And hopefully, you said something when we've talked before. You're like, I forgot how you articulated it, but you said we've admired the problem for a long time. And maybe
Exactly.
you took that from someone else, but
I did.
That really resonated with me. And we're pretty good at talking about the problem. And I guess the problem where I'm going with this is I sort of segue into a more person-centered claims handling paradigm is that, what are some of the actions and activities that we can do? And like you said, one of them is to ensure that your program has a return to work policy in place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll even say that even before you get to that, how about we just call the injured worker? How about that? And I say that because in my program, we talk to the injured worker, and I will tell you that 90% of the time they're telling us that no one's talking to them. And that goes for the insurance carriers and the employers. And I think I mentioned to you that I was in a webinar not that long ago. I think it was last month, and we polled the audience and said, how many of you speak to your injured worker, or do you rely on your TPA or carrier to do so? And well over 60% said they relied on the TPA or carrier to talk to the injured worker. And I challenged that audience, and I said, I challenge you today to pick up the phone and call your injured worker and ask them how they are. And I don't think there's any attorney in the United States that's going to come down on you for calling and asking, how are you? Are you okay? How's your family? How's your recovery going?
I'm laughing just because it seems so common sense and like a no-brainer. It's so basic, but it's incredibly powerful, and it's an activity any of us can do. And then part of me thinks, you mentioned two things. You mentioned that a return to work program can greatly reduce the value of the claim and take care of unnecessary litigation. So when you or your team is working with someone and they go, hey, no one's calling me over there, what's
Right.
going on? I'm going to call Morgan or whatever. Can you intercede? Can you say, okay, like maybe I need to let the claims handler know
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's only so much we can do. Obviously, we're a
Right.
service provider in the industry, and but we absolutely will contact the employer, we'll contact the carrier and TPA or the adjuster, and we'll let them know, hey, this injured worker, they haven't received a paycheck in a month, or they need to talk to you about their next doctor's appointment, or whatever it is. They are very, very concerned, and we pass that message along. We hope that resolves the injured worker's problem. Typically, we'll hear back from the injured worker if it hasn't, and we try to get them together. And listen, I recognize that we all have like staffing issues right now, and times are a little tough when it comes to the job market, and people's work loads might be heavier. But I would argue that the most important thing is that injured worker, and anything else that you're dealing with on your desk, is not as important. So, and I gave that message to my company at a staff meeting the other day. I said, people are our priority. And if you're doing anything else that's not that priority, I need to understand what that it is so I can take it away.
Yeah.
I mean, I read an article, another article this week about artificial intelligence and how that might come into play in our industry. And I'm sure it will, and to some degree, probably already has. But we can never get away from the human element of this industry. We can't ever get away from the human interaction that is required for an injured worker to recover. We just can't. I hope we never get there.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that in general, the industry sort of within its own echo chamber has bounced around for quite a while, because of the fact that experienced claim folks will be phasing out. They'll be retiring.
Absolutely.
They're going to want to sit on the beach and have a pina colada and not handle claims anymore. But with that, there will be a loss of domain expertise. And I think there will also be a loss of a claims handling style that's more geared towards, and I mean, I think it sounds crazy to call like picking up the phone old school. I mean, it's just like talking to a human being. And it makes me wonder, when we first started talking, when you went and visited people in their homes, obviously that's just second nature to you. That's just how you were a field adjuster.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I wonder if some of that sort of permeated the culture in the company that you founded. And that's how it is, because it's effective and because that's how you deal with people. You don't build a relationship with someone by sending them a form work comp, a work comp form rather.
No.
That's written in legalese and cites regs and statutes, and that's not how you develop a relationship.
That they'll never understand. They'll never understand. I mean, we sat across the table from injured workers and explained to them how the process was going to work. So, and I'm not sure that we'll get back to that, where we would be in the field meeting with them.
Right.
But there's no reason why we shouldn't be talking to them more often and more regularly, and remembering that there's another human at the end of the process. And even if we use artificial intelligence, and I think we should for some things, and maybe if we did, the adjuster would have more time to spend with the injured worker. We should use it so that it benefits the injured worker and the relationship and connection we can make to them to help them with the recovery.
So sort of transitioning to you were talking about technology, and I 100% agree with you that I hope it never supplants human interaction between either a service provider or a claims handler and an injured worker. Sort of transitioning towards, we're going to be losing experienced, seasoned claims professionals, and hopefully maybe technology can take over some of the manual, heavily administrative processes. But what do we do to get folks excited about this industry so we can bring in the next generation of folks and have them we can pass the torch and have them take over?
Yeah, it's a great question, right? And I'm not really in that TPA carrier side of the business anymore. But what I think, I'm starting to see glimpses of it just through social media with some of the internship programs that some of the TPAs, the larger TPAs, are putting together to attract talent. But here's the thing I think we need to remember, right? So millennials make up the majority of the workforce right now. And that group of people cares about purpose. They care about purpose. They care about why they do things. They want to make an impact and a difference. And I would say that we need to send that message that that's what insurance does. That's what workers' compensation does. It makes a difference in people's lives. And we need to get away from, like what you said, the negative connotations of, then the sensational stories about the guy who was committed fraud and was prosecuted and put in jail. And we need to talk about the good that comes out of it. And that's actually what we've started doing even in my own company, is because we have stories too. We have the bad stuff that happens too. It's human nature. It's going to happen. But we are focusing on the good, and we're sharing the good stories. And I think we need to do a much better job in our industry of talking about the good that we do and the impact we can make in people's lives, and the recovery that results, from the work that we do. And I think if we really focus on purpose, we can attract people to our industry. And our industry is great. I mean, you can work in all aspects of it. There's IT, there's sales, there's marketing, there's account management, customer service. I mean, it's not just claims adjusting, underwriting. There's, actuaries that you can do. You could like anything and be in this industry, or be good at anything pretty much and be in this industry. But to attract people to adjusting, I think we have to then consider taking some of that administrative stuff out of it and putting the human connection back in, because that's what gives people purpose. Yeah. I think we realized that through the pandemic as well, Sean, right? I mean, we were so disconnected from each other. And I think you told me that was one of the reasons why you started your podcast, was so you could just start talking to people.
That's it. I just wanted to talk selfishly. I just wanted to talk to people. But I mean, obviously I had to have it within the subject matter of right. Claims and injured folks, but yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and so I think that if we really focused on purpose and connection, we could attract more people into this industry and all aspects of it, whether it's working for the employer and working in risk management and helping employees, or if it's working for a TPA or an insurance carrier.
Yeah, and you said it briefly, but I want to circle back to it. And I've been in and around workers' comp and claims for 15-ish years now, and there is some sort of reflex with, and I'm an attorney by trade, with attorneys and claims handlers, like we want to commiserate about the bad, and I don't know why that is. It's probably a whole nother podcast with a psychological study on the negative. But I mean, there's like dedicated webinars I've seen to the awful cases, and we all have the war stories that we have. But I think it perpetuates negative connotations that sort of carry out in how we deal with people. I think it makes us react in a different way. I think it shapes and informs our how we interface with injured people, and it's not fair. It's not fair to them. So I'm 100% with you when we talked about that. Like I'm going to get away from talking about the gnarly stuff, because it doesn't matter unless it's educational and instructive from a clinical perspective or a theoretical perspective.
Or to learn from it.
Yeah, exactly. Unless it's instructive, but not to romanticize them, because they're so few and far between. They're a small percentage of.
Absolutely. And even like I would say, I was talking to a plaintiff's attorney not that long ago who shared a story of how he helped a person, an injured worker, and what success came from that help. And we don't ever look at that side either. Right. We don't tend to look at what the plaintiff's attorneys are doing as a good thing, and they serve a purpose as well in this system. And don't get me wrong, there's the bad there too, right? I mean, it's all sides, but they have some really great stories of success as well. And maybe if they shared some of those, that side shared, we would all kind of then collectively have this just good news, Yeah. And even like with our staff, I mean, I drill it down into us as leaders, and even leaders in claims shops who are bringing this younger generation of adjusters in to squash those stories, and say, yeah, that was a bad one. But you know what? Most of them, 90% of them or more, 99% are people that we're really helping. Let's focus on those. Because we can have a bad day and a bad situation, and I know it can bring us down, but we can't let it take over.
Totally agree with you. I want to transition a little bit because you're a business owner and a leader. I want to talk a little bit about your leadership style and sort of what drives you and what your philosophy is on leadership and leading others.
Yeah, so you're not going to be surprised to hear that it's about caring about people, right? And it's interesting because, and I say this all the time, the reason you go into the business is not necessarily the reason you stay in business.
Yeah.
Right. And I would say that I went into business thinking, wow, there's a service, there's a need, and I can probably do it better than the next guy or the next person. But as I started hiring people and helping injured workers, and I would say that even it probably happened with my staff before it happened with the injured workers, because it took a little bit longer for me to hear the stories. But with my own people, how I started to be able to impact their lives on a positive way, that is what really drove me to be a really good leader. So being empathetic and caring for them within reason, of course. I mean, I still have a business to run and have to be profitable and all of those things. But really caring about my people, I think, is the most important thing. And I kind of go back to what I had said to my staff. I mean, that was a meeting that I had with our leadership team. And I said, if you're not taking care of your people, we will never produce the way we need to produce. We have to care for them first, right? And so my mid-management level people, their job is to care for the people that report up to them and to mentor them and train them and teach them the skills that they need to learn to grow in their career, whether it's here or not here. And I would say that that's a message that I send very clearly throughout my organization. I don't expect you to stay, but I want you to say, when you look in the rearview mirror, that you learned something from your experience here that was positive, that got you to the next place. And I love sharing those stories about people who have left my company and have gone on to do really, really great things. Yeah. That's exciting to me. So I guess I'm the kind of leader that wants to grow and develop people and see them succeed, whether that's within my own company or outside of my company.
That's a very selfless point of view to take. Oftentimes, there's resentment from an employer if an employee gets a job that might be an upgrade for them, and it's unfortunate. It's kind of petty too. So
yeah, it is.
I wish more leaders would take that page.
Yeah, I mean, I want to create an environment that makes my people want to stay. But there's always going to be opportunities for people to leave for more money or for growth. And, I can't always compete with that. Right. And so it's just something that I accept. And again, I hope that when they leave this company, they're going to look back and go, that was a great experience. And I learned something there. And maybe I wouldn't have gotten this job if it weren't for what I learned while working for ReEmployAbility.
So looking back from, 1990, when you got started till now, where do you see, or let me rephrase that, where would your hope be that sort of workers' compensation goes? If there's a few things that you could think of that, I wish this would happen, or that would occur.
I would really love to see us move from being transactional to much more of a connection with the injured worker and with people in general. I think that the pandemic has made that a little bit harder. And I think in this world of now, remote work, in some ways it's brought us together, but in some ways it's made us separate, because we're not together as much as we used to be. But I'd love to see our industry go from less transaction to more person to person. And I think if we did that, we would see better results all the way around, and our injured workers would recover faster, and our mental well-being would be better as well. So when I mean, like going back to like your AI question, let's use the AI for the stuff that's administrative, that takes us away from the people, and let's get back to the people.
Yeah, it's interesting that it comes around full circle. You showing up in a driveway with a monkey jumping on your car roof. We need to get back to that, minus the monkey on the loose.
Exactly.
I'm really thankful that I got to meet you. And when I first met you, I was blown away. I'm like, how have I not heard of you before? Because I feel like I'm always sort of sleuthing on LinkedIn and looking for the positive voices and the folks making an impact. And clearly you've done that. You've kind of done it under the radar. So I'm fortunate that I'm helping to elevate your voice and your message that I think is pretty unique, but super positive.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you for finding me, actually. I appreciate that. And I have flown under the radar, I have to admit. Building a business is not easy. I'm mostly wearing the CEO hat, and there's a lot that goes with that. And I feel like I finally, it's taken me 20 years. 20 years in business next year. I finally have a strong senior leadership team that has really taken the reins and allowing me to get out there and now get my voice out and my message out. And I have this 20 years of experience now too, that I just really feel like I need to share, and it's so not just the return to work side, but it's the running the business side and like I shared with you, it's how you lead your people.
Are there any organizations within the industry that you're involved in, like the Alliance of Women in Workers' Compensation, or any others that you're passionate about or that you want to talk about?
Mostly I'm just a little bit involved in the Alliance. I haven't taken any kind of a leadership role there. Some of my staff has, though. They're a little bit more involved. Really in my own community is where I like to serve. And I am on the board of directors for the Spring of Tampa Bay, which raises awareness and helps victims of, or survivors, I should say, of domestic violence. And so that's been a real passion of mine over the last several years. And it's another organization that I sort of came onto just by happenstance. I was looking for a women's organization to support, and that organization came up, and the CEO, Mindy Murphy, and I are very well aligned. She runs her business is about the same size as my business, the nonprofit is. And so we have a lot of things that we can bounce off each other, but it really made me aware of the realities of domestic violence that still exist in our society. That was shocking really to me, because again, you hear the sensational news stories and you think it's not happening in your backyard, but it's happening in your backyard. So I encourage people to get out and just get involved in their community. It's really eye-opening. But other than that, really, no, I'm very involved at the conferences we go to, and I'm speaking a lot more and being asked to be on panels, which I absolutely love because it helps me to get my voice out. And if there's an organization out there that interests me, I would definitely get involved in it.
Yeah, well, I greatly appreciate the time you've taken today, and I'm thankful that you're sharing your story and what you do and your message and philosophy with the community at large. And would love to have you back on.
Oh yeah, I would love it, and actually, I would love to have you on our podcast. So I think our national sales manager Todd will be reaching out to you. So we have
Absolutely.
Our own as well.
It would be my pleasure. Well, it's settled. Debra Livingston, appreciate it very much. And we look forward to having you back on, and I will absolutely return the favor.
Thanks, Sean.
All right, take care.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of It's Settled, the Ametros podcast. For more information and episodes, you can visit us at our website at ametros.com. That's ametros.com. Or head over to iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. We hope you enjoyed this episode and look forward to sharing more stories of people overcoming their workplace accidents and bodily injury claims, and those who are working hard to make a difference for them. So it's settled. We'll see you next time.